I'm wondering, what is the status of the amendment right now?
So in terms of the status of the amendment, we are currently in Congress as House Joint Resolution 48, and we've been introduced into 4 different congressional sessions since 2013. And we continue to grow that number every year. Our goal for this year is to get 75 co-sponsors. But yeah, basically, we're working to build this movement from the ground up. That's the most effective way that we've been able to make sure that this amendment stays within the public consciousness, as well as within members of Congress's purview as well. So one of the things that we're looking for support in doing is to organize, first and foremost, organize in solidarity with frontline communities and their struggles against corporate rule. And as you work with them and follow their leadership, spread the word about how corporate constitutional rights impacts all of us within our daily lives, as well as within our respective movement circles. And the first and foremost thing that you can easily do is signing our motion to amend, which if you go to the link on the website, you can add your name to over 470,000 others who have added their names to this national petition, or you can text it by phone by just texting amend to 707-656-4019. Most importantly, too, beyond just signing the motion to amend, members of Congress need to hear not just from individuals and their constituents, but also from organizations that support us in this. And one thing that we're encouraging all organizations to do is pass a resolution endorsing the We the People Amendment and join up over 500 other organizations who have added their names to this national list of organizations to support. Because together we can pressure Congress and the states to take action. Amending the Constitution doesn't come around very often. Opportunities for that typically only happen once within every generation. And it's why, as Jan was mentioning, before, of how the We the People Amendment addresses both of these court-created doctrines, corporate constitutional rights and money of speech, that we have to make sure that the amendment language is strong enough and commensurate to the effort needed to amend the Constitution. So we have to get it right the first time. And we're already advancing it so far. In fact, we're looking to introduce the We the People Amendment in the Senate for the first time this year. And we could definitely use help contacting our senators here in California, Dianne Feinstein, as well as Kamala Harris, to ask them to work with Move to Amend to introduce the We the People Amendment's companion bill in the Senate for the first time.
Okay, so what we can do immediately would be to sign the motion.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I wonder if anybody has any questions.
First of all, I want to say good talks. It's a fabulous cause. All of your ideas are obviously right and needed. The obvious question is passing a constitutional amendment is a very, very high bar. I'm a getting rid of gun advocate, and that's not going to happen. The possibility of getting a constitutional amendment is extraordinarily high. I'm a big fan of Jane Mayer had a great book on dark money, and she talked about how the Koch brothers and their cohorts really took a systemic approach for 10 or 20 years, changing the whole legal system. And it's kind of what I think we need to do on the left, is a similar project to really change the way the legal system approaches things and find some way of crowding out the right and their kind of crazy theories. What do you think about that high bar of constitutional amendment?
Well, I think we can both respond to that. Kiana, you want to go first?
Absolutely. And I think you're really on the right track in terms of we need to not just focus in on Congress, but this is a multi-pronged movement that requires us to not only change the politics of our current system, but also change the culture within our system. That's why we at Move to Amend are really focused at building power at the grassroots level in order to build representation within our communities, to educate our neighbors, our friends, and our family members about the nature of corporate rule and how it connects with every struggle for justice, every issue that we care about with happening in the world today. We've actually, over the past 10 years, have helped to create more than 150 local volunteer groups and train and organize hundreds of local advocates who help to educate and spread the word about this movement. And one of the things that you all can do to help shape the conversation and really help change the culture is becoming local advocates yourselves. Those are individuals who represent Move to Amend to the organizations that they're already connected with, and building solidarity with them by supporting their cause, as well as educating them to show them how their cause is directly connected to ours, and that we can work together mutually in support of one another to make that happen, including those of us that are on both sides of the aisle. In fact, beyond just organizing these volunteer groups, our representatives for this coalition have been successful in helping to pass more than 800 local resolutions in cities, towns, and counties across the country calling for this amendment. And that includes over 350 local ballot initiatives that have passed in liberal and conservative communities alike. This includes places like Waukesha, Wisconsin, former Republican Governor Scott Walker's hometown, that in the same year reelected him during his recall election, passed one of our local ballot measures by a margin of over 70%. And this includes at the national level too, in places like Brecksville, Ohio, that voted for Mitt Romney in 2012, also passed one of our resolutions by a higher margin than what voted for him. And at the state level too, we've helped to pass more than 20 resolutions on this issue, including in red states and purple states like Montana, that passed a statewide ballot measure by a margin of 75 to 25%, calling for this amendment. And also in purple states like Colorado that passed one of our resolutions. And here in California in particular, most recently in 2016, we were successful in passing Proposition 59 that put our entire state's congressional delegation on notice that nearly 7 million people in California want Congress to propose this amendment to make clear corporations do not have the same rights as human beings, and that money is not protected political speech. So really what we need is people like yourselves individually, as well as working together in groups to educate your local circles as well as community leaders, to show them how this movement is connected and why it's within their own strategic analysis to include a support for the We the People Amendment as they move forward in their simultaneously important work.
Yeah, hi. I actually had a similar question in the sense that I think of this movement now to abolish the Electoral College, and I think the original thought process was, oh, wow, like in order to accomplish this mission, we need to, amend the U.S. Constitution, and basically you need a 2/3 majority of both the House and the Senate, and you're going to need 3/4 of the states to ratify it in order for the Constitution to be amended. And so the folks in that realm looked at that challenge and said, okay, well, maybe there's another way we can accomplish this. And so, the modern day answer to that is that Electoral College Compact, and we're really close. I mean, we're really close to having, a number of states sign on to that compact, so that maybe not in this presidential election, but maybe the next one will have a true popular vote without having to modify the U.S. Constitution. So I'm wondering, is there any sort of equivalent alternative course of action that could be conducted and completed that can get us to the same place without having to modify the U.S. Constitution? And the last thing I wanted to throw out there is, I think it's really interesting that, we have taken ownership of this term, the quote left, and it's interesting because the right thing to do is to eliminate private money from public elections, and the right thing to do would be to end racism and sexism, and all the issues that we support are right, but we claim left, and the psychology of that is interesting. And I'm just getting one of your thoughts on, maybe we should consider a different approach, or maybe not saying we're left, but we are right.
Dan, you want to try and take this?
Sure. First of all, I want to thank both of you who asked questions, and I want to thank both gentlemen for working on issues that are extremely important. Getting this constitutional amendment takes patience, a lot of patience. And a Move to Amend was formed a little over 10 years ago. And they knew right from the start that this is going to be a long slog, and I think it is. Here's what I think. Politics follows culture. And what we're trying to do is change the culture. And I think we can do that. I mean, a lot of conservative places have been hurt, very badly hurt, by things that corporations are doing under the assertion of corporate constitutional rights. For example, in Pennsylvania, they have these, they have the family hog farms, and then the huge factory farms with, 5,000, I don't know, 10,000 hogs. And the small hog farmers got teed off that they had to compete with these behemoths. And they wanted to protect their small family farms. So they went to CELDEF, which is the Community Environmental Legal Defense Fund. And CELDEF said, well, we can't change this. It's, they've got the constitutional right to do that. And they said, well, we don't care. We're not gonna recognize that, And they had all these meetings in barns and stuff like that. And they said to CELDEF, you just write us up an ordinance that says we don't recognize the doctrine of corporate constitutional rights. Well, these ordinances can get overturned, because there's the court would say, well, it violates the equal protection clause of the Constitution that businesses have to be, or the people need to be treated equally, and so they think, well, they're both hog farms, so they're both equal, and you can't ban these huge factory farms. Well, so they passed these ordinances. Now, some of the corporations have been scared off by them, but then some, just move to another town and do their huge hog farming there. But what's hopeful is that these conservative communities are being woken up. And that's what we need, is a massive, I mean, when we get out of our pandemic confinement, we need millions, literally millions and millions and millions of people in the streets. And it would be so good if we can, a lot of organizations, and I'm not saying those you work for, that you volunteer for, but some progressive organizations that want to get rid of, deal with all these problems, they stay in their silos. And we're not saying that other organizations should take up our work, but we are saying they can at least have one plank of their platform to be getting rid of corporate constitutional rights, which is the only way they're going to get anywhere. And so what we're trying to build is coalitions of organizations, so that when it comes time to address Congress, or that there's just going to be, they'll be swamped, and that millions of people be in the streets, and politicians want to get reelected. So eventually, hopefully, they'll either do this constitutional amendment themselves, or we'll go through the states to do it. So I do appreciate your concern. As far as doing this without a constitutional amendment, yes, if we changed the Supreme Court, which would be a very heavy lift right now, the Supreme Court could overrule itself. I don't see that happening. But even if it did, it wouldn't be long before these corporations raised their heads again. I mean, that's how they got corporate constitutional rights in the first place. They were whispering in the ears of these, the court clerk I talked about, he was a railroad baron. Some court clerk reporter, huh?
Right.
Yeah. So,
own railroad company.
So I I honestly believe that the only way we're going to skin this cat is to get a constitutional amendment. And it will take a revolution, a peaceful revolution, but it's going to take a revolution. So,
Right.
sorry to go on like that, but as you can tell, I'm very passionate about this.
I think Jan stated our position very eloquently. Going through, trying to pass this without a constitutional amendment is extremely hard. It really depends upon the Supreme Court overturning itself, as it's an interpretation of the constitutional framework. But there are other ways beyond just, going through Congress. There are other ways which we can do that. The question of other strategies that could push this over the top in our favor is to go around Congress and push state legislatures to petition for what is known as an amendment proposing convention, where 2/3 of state legislatures or 34 states petition on the same issue to basically propose the amendment themselves and then send it to 38 states, the 3/4 of state legislatures, to ratify it after the fact. Now, this has never happened since the first constitutional convention that drafted the Constitution we have now. However, every time that states have come close to calling for such a convention, which from my historical analysis, we've come close about 5 times, it has pushed Congress to take action on the amendment themselves. Most particular example being the 17th Amendment's direct election of senators. So we're focused at Move to Amend on passing the amendment through Congress because that's the most successful method. That's how 27 amendments have been added to the Constitution thus far. But we don't want to take this tool off the table either, because it's proven to be a powerful tool of leverage to force Congress and the states to take action. So our strategy is a multi-pronged effort to push Congress to take action. And if they don't take action within a reasonable enough time period, we are working simultaneously to pass resolutions in state legislatures, like we've done, similar to what we've done in Montana, Colorado, and the other 20 states, but with more teeth, where it's binding. That is like a formal call by the state for Congress to take action. And if they don't act after a certain period, like a certain date, then the state will formally converts the law to an official petition calling for an amendment proposing convention exclusively on this particular amendment.
I worked for a company that was headed by someone. It was a small company, but the real problem was the person that led it, not really the company. And whenever a company went bad due to his malpractice, he would just make another company under a new name.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of that hiding behind the corporate veil type of thing. And I was just wondering if you have anything to say about holding the people accountable rather than holding the company accountable, holding the people that make the decisions accountable. Because I do think we do that to a degree in our current system. Usually when there's a big blunder, the people who are at the top get replaced and there's some sort of purge. So I was just wondering if you have something to say about that.
I do.
Go ahead, Jan. I have something to say too.
Oh, well, you can go first. That's all right.
Sure. So, yeah, there are some companies that can be held accountable. Usually they're smaller companies when they try and make those big leaps and hide behind the corporate veil. But it's significantly harder to hold those accountable who exist within the much larger multinational corporations, the Amazons, the Apples, the Walmarts of the world. And we have seen time and time again, even when we are able to pressure them through coordinated lawsuits, class action lawsuits, and direct actions and protests outside their headquarters and properties, simply changing the leadership isn't enough to change the culture that's rooted within these companies that allows that corruption to run rampant, basically. And it kind of stems too from the founding culture that was established here in the United States. Where you look at the original document of the Constitution, you'll notice that before the first 10 amendments, the Bill of Rights, it had absolutely nothing to do with human rights or well-being. It was exclusively a property rights document that added human rights as an afterthought. And that culture persisted even after the first 10 amendments were passed because it failed to define who is a person worthy of protection under the Constitution, which allowed governments, as well as those companies established under these governments, to basically treat certain people differently and deny them basic human rights based on their identities, their race, their gender, their sex, and their class. So it's not enough to just change the face of the company or change the people within the company. We have to really challenge and change the culture, both within the companies as well as within our communities and society and the national governments themselves. And that takes longer to do, but it's an intentional effort that other movements that we follow in the footsteps of, from the abolitionist movement to the suffragist movement to the trade unionist movement, labor movement, to like that we are all part of, and the civil rights movement that continues on into today, in order to really push beyond just changing the faces of these companies, but also change their cultures as well. And that's part of why we need to really focus in on educating members of these companies, as well as members of government and our communities and our neighbors and friends in order to do that.
Well, I don't want to shock anybody, but we don't have a functioning democracy. And the definition of fascism is the marriage of government and business. And big business is not going to be held accountable until we change our whole legal system. There are two doctrines that underpin the lack of corporate accountability. One is the limited liability doctrine. The directors, the CEOs of these companies, particularly the behemoth companies, have to have skin in the game. They have to pay out of their own overstuffed pockets. That's what they understand. They understand money. And until we change that stupid ruling that they have limited liability, we're not going to get the kind of accountability we need. And of course, the corporate constitutional rights doctrine, big time removes their accountability. They can just do enormous harm, ruin the place, and who pays for it? The towns, the people, we the people. We end up paying, we end up bailing out. What is with this system? So I'm always amazed that the right got to be called conservatives. They are the wreckers. They are the radicals. We're the conservatives because we conserve human life, nature, Mother Earth, which sustains us. We're the conservatives. How did they get to be called conservatives? That's crazy. So we just have to, structural change is my hobby horse. We just have to dig in there and say, hey, we are changing the whole system. We are rooting the old system up. After all, we created government. We can remake government. We can repeal what we did and say, okay, this is government, this is what you're supposed to be doing. And we're creating the legal structure, the legal underpinning to force you to do that. And nothing less is going to change this government. I know I sound very revolutionary. I'm peaceful, but I guess I am a revolutionary and have been my entire life.
A revolution is what it's going to take.
Yes, it is going to take a revolution. And when we get everybody out on the street and in the halls of Congress and busting their internet systems and their telephones and saying, we ain't going to vote for you SOBs unless you do what we want, period.
Yep.
It's time to really fight back.
Yeah.
There I go.
Absolutely. No, I'm full of Jan. And one of the things too that we got to remember as we push for this amendment is understanding that this amendment isn't the end all be all. This is just, even when I first joined up, I viewed this as a critical first step.
Yeah. It just clears, evens the playing field. That's all it does. Then, we have to continue to elect people who will respond to, I didn't mention this, but I think this is important. There was a study by Gillens and Page, two professors, different universities, I think back in 2010, that found that the policies that are enacted, that what people want, what the general public wants, are almost never enacted into policy, into law. That because the corporations and their lobbyists, they have unlimited access to these politicians, partly because they give their donations. The politicians rely on them for donations. So the politicians are listening to the corporations and to rich people that make donations. So, and they concluded that what the people wanted, they didn't hear it. It was like a mere whisper compared to, the megaphone that the corporations and big bucks people had. So according to this study, our voices are not heard. And there was another study that said that politicians didn't care what their constituents wanted. So those studies are cited in, I guess, the second part of our educational series that I mentioned before. There's we've done 2 installments so far, and we're going to do one on climate change coming up. That's going to be interesting. But anyway, so there's 2 installments out, and the second installment talks about that study, the 2 studies. And so you can find it there at the website. And if you can't find it, I can send it to you. So I can send you that portion of the discussion.
Mm-hmm. Just to share again too, the website that you can access is movetoamend.org down here. I also wanted to share too, one of our issue caucuses, the Interfaith Caucus that Move to Amend has organized amongst communities of faith and ethical values. And that caucus has monthly calls every 3rd Monday at 5 p.m. Pacific that anyone is welcome to join if you are so inclined and interested. We're encouraging all communities of faith and ethical values, regardless of their beliefs, to join us in support of that. If you are so inclined as well and you want to get more involved with Move to Amend, we also encourage you to join our coalition. We have an active state network here in California of about 9 active affiliates and several local advocates that are working together to raise awareness about the We the People Amendment and get more of California's congressional delegations and organizations to support us in this movement. And you can learn more about how to become a local advocate or work together to form a local affiliate if you go to movetoamend.org/affiliate. And if you would rather just, maintain your autonomy but continue to support the We the People Amendment alongside your other important work and passions, you can always join to become an amendment working group simply, and we'll direct local supporters and volunteers to you if you go to movetoamend.org/amendment-working-group. And Jan mentioned it earlier, but in terms of further educational resources, if you go to the links right here at the bottom, you can find more talking points and educational readings about corporate constitutional rights and how it's connected with every issue and struggle for justice that's happening today by going to these links at the bottom. If you go to the main website, you can find them under the Learn More tab.
Okay.
Feel free to do that. And if you're so inclined to, we could definitely use your help as well to keep this website as well as our momentum going across the country. If you are so inclined to make a donation, as 90% of our funds come from small donors giving $40 or less. We can always use help in continuing to grow this movement and keep the momentum going within Congress and at the state level.
Jan and Kian, where does the Green New Deal fit into this?
Great question. We actually have literature on the website that speaks to why the Green New Deal needs a We the People amendment. And just to put it short, I mean, any legislation, whether it's passed at the federal level, the state level, or the local level, if it is to overcome a corporate lawsuit on constitutional rights grounds, is going to it's going to need this amendment, because as it stands, if the Green New Deal were to pass tomorrow, a major corporation like ExxonMobil or British Petroleum could sue on the grounds of probably the 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, the Substantive Due Process Clause, as well as the Fifth Amendment's Takings Clause to encourage. So if we're going to, whatever we do pass, the Green New Deal or something even stronger than that, we need an amendment that really abolishes these illegitimate doctrines of corporate constitutional rights.
Okay. Yeah, I was hoping maybe the pandemic and all the money that Congress is so busily putting together, I hope they could slip in some money to go. And they'd have. The Democrats have done a good job in at least turning it over and getting some for small businesses and all that. But I was hoping that somehow all this big money wouldn't be going to bail out the big corporations, and I guess that's a lost cause.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, I mean, well, that's one of the silver linings within this pandemic. As awful as it is right now, it also presents a critical opportunity that we do not get very often to actually demand and fight for broader systemic change, for better or worse even, because we as we can see with the US's pandemic response, those in power, our corporate rulers, are already moving to radically transform the system. And they're doing it to the tune of trillions of dollars in bailout money that's being given to these major corporations with little to no oversight from either party or this current administration.
Yeah, I'm very disappointed in the no oversight business and how easily Trump just did away with it.
Right. But it also conversely provides us the opportunity to hold these individuals and these parties accountable and really fight for deeper changes than simply, expanded unemployment benefits or paid sick leave. But this is an opportunity for us to unite across our respective movements and issues to really demand top to bottom changes within the system, not simply reform it, but to transform it into one that actually is accountable and representative of all people, not just our commercial interests.
Thanks so much for all you're doing.